Hello, everybody, and welcome to our very first podcast looking at the Hubbub Explores workshops we've been hosting at Hubbub since the crisis started. We've been exploring how we can build a more sustainable society post-crisis, talking to experts about how we can build back better. Over the course of just a few weeks, the global COVID-19 crisis has completely transformed how we operate as a society, how we interact with each other as neighbours, colleagues and citizens, how we shop, eat, socialise, travel and work. No one really knows how long this is going to last or what the world will look like on the other side, but we do know that this presents an opportunity for communities and businesses to come together to build a fairer, more sustainable society for the future. So we've been running these workshops every week on Zoom, and I'm joined today with Viki and Dan, who were part of our first workshop, to talk to them a little bit about what their presentations are and to get the key points for the things that we discussed in that first workshop, which was about what is a purpose-driven business and what will it look like post-crisis. So first up, Viki Cooke is with us from Britain Thinks. Hi, Viki.
Hi there.
So you were giving a presentation on some research that Britain Thinks conducted into how people were thinking and feeling about lockdown and how their behaviour had changed. I wonder if you can give us a little overview about what you were talking about in that first workshop.
Yeah, of course. Well, this is based largely on some work that we've been doing for the last 8 weeks, a project of our own called the Coronavirus Diaries, where we have been following 50 people from very different walks of life to really understand what life is like for them under lockdown, how they're feeling, how they're thinking, who their heroes are, who the zeros are, really understanding what their life is like. That on top of a lot of other work we've been doing both in the form of focus groups and depth interviews with people, and some of our own polling and looking at other people's polling. So this really just gives you an overview, drawing on a whole lot of different sources of information. So I think it's fair to say that actually for pretty well everybody, their lives changed completely on March the 23rd. I think some of us kind of had a sense something was coming, but I think just the scale and impact of going into a total national lockdown had a massive effect on people. And so what we really wanted to understand is how's that impacting on how they feel, their hopes and dreams for the future. And one of the things relatively early on we looked at was identifying 4 distinct groups in society. So we looked at who was coping well and who wasn't coping well. And we saw that almost 3/4 of the population are actually coping quite well with it at the moment. But that does mean that about just over a quarter are really not coping well at all. And that's a lot of people who are really, really struggling. And whether they're struggling because of mental health challenges, for a lot of people this has been an incredibly difficult time, or it may be that they're really struggling because of financial reasons, or suddenly trying to grapple with having their children at home, trying to do homeschooling, keep their job. Maybe, it's been very hot so far, which for many of us who are lucky enough to have gardens has been great. But if you don't, it's very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. But we also wanted to see who had experienced a lot of change and who hadn't. And 2/3 of the population have experienced an awful lot of change, which is no great surprise. I think perhaps what surprised us more were the third who said they've actually experienced very little change. Often that was people who are older or retired, for whom it hasn't had a particularly significant economic impact, and probably they were just much more used to spending time at home. I think one of the things that we found most interesting, though, when we looked at it over the course of a few weeks, what was kind of quite clear was that there are real sort of signs that the public are going through a version of the 5 stages of grief for their past lives. And you could really see this in the language they were using, the way they were expressing how they were feeling. So it kind of started with denial, and people talked about, a typical quote was, "It's surreal, going outside during this seems like a movie, everything is so deserted, and it's difficult to believe this pandemic is really happening." So that was very typical of the comments, just couldn't quite believe it. Then people got quite angry, and then they started bargaining. And then there was a period where a lot of people got quite depressed and felt quite low. But then we moved into, which is probably lucky, bearing in mind how long it's gone on and how much longer it might go on for, quite a sort of strong sense of acceptance. And now, and you'll probably have seen from recent polling, people are worried that actually we're lifting the lockdown too quickly, that we're now feeling we've got used to it in many ways and we're feeling sort of fairly safe. So somebody said, we know it's going to be a long time, maybe a year before we can really get back to normal. But we've just got to get used to it and do what's right. So really clear signs of people going through this 5 stages of grief. Mm-hmm. But I think what we've also seen is as people become more accepting, we've also seen, which is incredibly encouraging for Hubbub and for anybody who wants a more just and sustainable world, a kind of really strong sense of hope and unity and solidarity. And if you bear in mind just how divided we felt as a nation before this, I think in a way, one of the upsides is it's given us time to reflect, think about what really matters, and perhaps come together as a bit more of a community. I think people were incredibly humbled by the speed at which 1 million people volunteered to help the NHS. Captain Tom, great hero of our time. The newly found respect we have for essential workers, whether that's somebody, it's a bin man or somebody working in a supermarket, through obviously to the NHS workers. So when you start talking to people about coronavirus, they start fearful and regretful, frightened of the virus, worried about the kind of short, medium and long-term economic impact, really regretting a lot of things. I think, again, it's really lovely just about anybody say, what's the one thing you really want to do when this is over? Pretty well everyone says, I want to go and hug my gran if they're lucky enough to still have one, or see somebody in my family, or it's all about personal, close relationships. But for lots of people, they've missed massive occasions in their life. Lots of weddings that are being cancelled, people who graduated from university or college this year who didn't get their degree ceremony. Mm-hmm. And tragically, for a lot of people, they've had to miss funerals. And so a lot of sense of loss and regret, and also kind of anxiety about what the future itself looks like.
Absolutely. And now that we've entered this stage, which is a little bit more like acceptance, and we're finding a space to enjoy the positive things that lockdown might be bringing us, how do we continue that if we go back into any kind of normal? If people have found more time to do, positive, sustainable things at home, do we just go back to the way it was before?
So no, I really, really hope not. And I think what's really encouraging is just so many people, have kind of rediscovered the simple pleasures in life. And the number of people you talk to who've taken up cooking or baking again, or listening to birds, and so there are lots of great things that people have rediscovered that I think playing games together, playing card games, playing board games. So I think there's a real sense of refinding ourselves and just realizing that we were on this crazy treadmill before. So people are very keen to hold on to that. People have noticed that the air feels cleaner, it's quieter, views are better, you can hear the birds singing. So people talk about it almost as though the planet's got a chance to breathe again. So people are really saying, let's build on that. Let's not go back to where we were. Let's use this as a moment to reset. Let's build on the kind of strengthening communities we're feeling. People know their neighbours now.
I know.
Yeah, so people are wanting to use that as a springboard. People are really recognising the value of the independent shop on the high street. Really wanting to support local community, independent people. So I think there's a fabulous sense of optimism, and I think it's up to people like Hubbub, with your amazing creativity, to kind of help harness that and help us stay the people we currently want to be.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for that. I'm going to come back to that actually at the end, so hold on to that thought. But I'm just going to introduce Dan Smith, who's also on the line, who's from Headland Consultancy.
Hi, Sarah, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you, very good indeed.
So you were also part of our first workshop, talking more from a business side about how this has affected businesses and what their response has been. And I wondered if you could give us a little bit of an overview, and then maybe you and Viki can have a chat at the end when it all comes together.
Absolutely, yeah. So, as you say, my role in the workshop was to take a look at sort of the business response to the crisis, and sort of look at that from different points of view, different sectors and different kinds of organisations that we work with, and then take a look at actually the big questions on corporate purpose. I think it's fair to say that the crisis has shone a light on how purposeful organisations are, how minded they are to help employees, their wider stakeholders, communities, and obviously make sure that they do the right thing by those that use their services or their products. And it's been fascinating to see the likes of, firsthand, likes of Lidl and Co-op sort of responding to help feed the nation in that instant burst, as we realised that food supply chains were under unbelievable pressure as the virus sort of put us all into lockdown. Some sort of stranger things that companies had to deal with. We worked with 3 Mobile, for example, and their engineers who were helping us stay connected were having to face up to difficult situations where there was scare stories out there linking coronavirus to 5G, and that was sort of a very interesting response that an organization had to go through the period. And then lovely stories, organizations like eBay, who basically built a platform which enabled people to get hold of PPE equipment at short notice, and really helped sort of people access the things that they needed at short notice. And then other organizations who just had, you know, unbelievable impact on their business models. So we work with the likes of Airbnb, where, you know, the idea of suddenly going to someone else's home to go on holiday is just a completely foreign concept when we were so accepting of it beforehand. So yeah, the main themes that I think are worth reflecting on from how organizations did respond, I think it's overall a really positive one. You know, businesses and those who, you know, are well known for having purposes, but well beyond that, sort of a purpose-led strategy, that clearly organizations were behaving in a way where they really wanted to help and make a contribution. So for example, we worked with Pret, and one of the first things they did was give a discount to NHS workers. That wasn't because they felt the need to do it to sort of show that they were doing the right thing. It's because that's how they think, that's how they instinctively want to do business. It's the right thing to do, but they don't need to sort of have that as a lens of their decision making. It's just how they operate. So it's fantastic to see that there has genuinely been this shift, and, you know, to use the corporate jargon, a shift from, you know, a shareholder first view of the world to a stakeholder first approach. And you saw that in the crisis playing out consistently. So, you know, many reasons to be upbeat about how the corporate world responded. And then I think one element of that worth drawing on is just how every organization wanted to do the right thing by their employees. You know, it was very, very tough when you start to get to things like furloughing and having to communicate that, and how you're dealing with the fact that actually there's real health issues that face your employees, and they're under, you know, potentially having to go to work in unsafe conditions, or, you know, conditions that are completely trying for the organization. So it was really warming to see that organizations not only wanted to do the right thing by their employees, but just how front and center their employees' well-being, their employees' health, and their overall kind of long-term ambition to keep employees as part of their organization just came to the fore. But I guess that leads us on to just ask a few questions about what comes next. It's one thing for organizations to respond well in the heat of a crisis. It's another thing to be able to do that as the world enters what will hopefully be not too long a recession, but it certainly could be a deep one. Mm-hmm. So I think some of the big questions just that we should think about are, you know, what does it mean to be a purposeful organization when you are, as an organization, under a lot of pressure? How will that play out? Let's hope that consumers, employees don't lose out. There's no sign of that at the moment. If anything, you know, the strategies that organizations are talking about are about how we can be more resilient together, how we make sure that we build a resilient recovery. So lots of thinking to be done there. And then I guess finally, just a thought about actually, can others play a role in prompting us to a more sustainable future? So will regulators and investors not go back to kind of I guess 2008 type mentality, where they were just there to make sure that bad news didn't happen, but actually can be a progressive force and help us build a recovery which actually allows organizations to express sort of their ESG and their sustainability kind of thinking and credentials in a really meaningful way.
On that, I wonder, do you think that businesses who were maybe a bit quicker to bring out the kind of purpose of what they were doing, so who were quicker to react in a kind way to people, are customers going to flock to those businesses? Are they going to support businesses who they've seen to respond well during the crisis?
Yeah, I think there's a really important question, actually. And I think those organizations that actually had purpose and purposeful strategies really at their heart were able to make decisions in the crisis, and will continue to make decisions which allow them to actually build a competitive advantage and do the right things by consumers. So if you think about actually before coronavirus, there was already evidence showing that those companies doing the right thing, those companies that built products sustainably, actually that was becoming a differentiator in most sectors in terms of buying decisions. And I think the crisis has accelerated that. If you did the wrong thing during the crisis, I think that leaves a mark reputationally on your organization for a long time. Actually, those organizations that may not have done the right thing by employees, and certainly those that have behaved badly towards customers, I think will really feel the impact for a long time. And I think the positive side of that is those that have done well will continue to be the kind of the leaders in their market, and I think will be the ones that do really well over the next sort of few years as we recover.
Amazing, thank you.
Can I just add to that? There's one thing that we've been hearing a lot of people talking about, which I think is really interesting, which is so many employers have taken advantage of the furlough scheme. And the public are very, very supportive of the furlough scheme. They recognise it saved many, many jobs. But they are also very conscious that a lot of businesses have had a lot of taxpayers' money, and now they want to see those businesses step up to the mark. So if any of those businesses then go back to not paying tax really kind of to the full amount that they should openly, boy, are they going to feel the cold wind from the consumer. Because I think there's a rightness and a fairness that, that we all stepped in to help. You now need to kind of do your bit as we go forward. So I think it has reset the dial.
I think that's really interesting as well. So for employees, if your employer took public money, I think, yeah, they're going to be treated differently, actually. It was absolutely the right thing to do to make sure that, we give everyone a chance at employment in the long term. But the level of scrutiny will increase for those organisations. I think they will be judged more sharply over the coming months and years. So,
I'm really interested to see how that plays out. And just my final question to both of you is thinking, when we return to some kind of new normal, whatever that might be, what are the things that you're keeping an eye on, and what are the changes that you're invested in making sure are continued when we go back to normality?
Wow, great question. So I think one of the things is very much about people's relationships with their employees. I think, and it goes back really to what Dan was saying, I think those organisations that have kind of purpose at the heart of everything they do have probably built stronger relationships with their employees through this, even if they've had to take tough decisions. I think it's the way you take decisions, and I really hope that will continue, and that we'll all recognise that we can trust each other much more than perhaps people thought we could, that just the fact you can't see that someone's working doesn't mean they're not working, and and I think that's a really kind of positive step. So I think in terms of us as citizens and members of society, I think just remembering the kind of warmth of this and the desire to help each other out who maybe need a bit more support. I just think we need to hang on to that every single day, because that's how we will heal that very deep division that we felt before.
I think the really interesting thing, and again, something to be optimistic about, not pessimistic, is our changing relationship between work and home life. I mean, we can talk about the death of the office or those kind of trends. I think that people can get too carried away on that. I don't think we're going to see the end of offices, but what I do think we're going to see is a real acceleration towards employers being really mindful about how you can get that work-life balance right, about how you can support people, through childcare while people work at home, about how you can do things which are sensitive to allowing them to spend more time in their communities throughout the week. And, as Viki rightly says, that warmth, people don't want to lose that. I think we are seeing that. How long it can stand the test of time, I think the first few months of returning to this new normal will be crucial. It takes a while to embed kind of a change in behaviour, particularly at kind of a societal level, but let's hope it is here to stay. And I think employers and big organisations can be a real force for good in that journey, because actually the reality of working from home for many isn't necessarily an easier choice at the moment. Mm-hmm. So I hope that we can bed down as a kind of community of organisations, as a corporate world, and really help accelerate a positive journey for people and make that experience easy and put it on people's terms, basically, to fit. And I think a changing way of doing business, which is much more befitting the reality of the modern world and the technology available to us.
Amazing. Well, I could talk about this all day, but we have run out of time. Thank you, both of you, for coming to speak to us. If anybody listening has any questions for us or for Dan or for Viki, please send them in. You can follow the Hubbub Explores hashtag. We've also got a page up on our website if you want to have a look at the future workshops that we have coming up. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. You guys are amazing. It's been really fascinating to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.